Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freeplay 2020. My name is Chad Toprak, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm the director of Freeplay. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Freeplay hosts and broadcasts from the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, where stories have been shared and games have been played since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and to anyone watching who has a connection to the world's oldest continuing culture. Sovereignty was never ceded, and the violence of the colonial project is ongoing. Freeplay would also like to acknowledge that we stand in solidarity with Black communities, both here and around the world, against prejudice, injustice, and violence. Black Lives Matter is not a new or revolutionary statement, but it is one that needs to be said and said again and said louder. So welcome to another talk for Freeplay 2020. This is on Worldness and the Poetics of Social Spaces. And joining us is the lovely Demi Schanzel from New Zealand. Demi, by smallest description, is a small times games academic and sometimes poet from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Supposedly in possession of pretty handwriting, they possess soft fondness for the atmospheric poetics of software, cartography, and the emptiness of abandoned game spaces. They recently published The Library of Babel, a microcosmic social network inspired by an indeterminate longing for smaller moments of connection and intimate belonging. You can find a Freeplay version of The Library of Babel at itch.io. The Library of Babel is also nominated for a Freeplay award this year as well. So please make Demi welcome, and I will hand it over to you.
Hey, good evening. Thank you so much to those of you joining me. It's really lovely to be here tonight. I suppose, yes, by name and description, my name is Demi Schanzel. I'm non-binary and I go by the pronouns they and them. I'm a small-time games designer and academic, and I recently published The Library of Babel, a small microcosmic social network. And before this talk commences, I too would simply like to acknowledge that this talk broadcasts from the stolen lands of the Ngāti Whātua iwi of Aotearoa, where stories too have been shared and games have been played since time immemorial. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to anyone watching who may have a connection to this space. Te Tere o Waitangi was founded from colonial lies we all still collectively struggle under today. And I too would simply like to murmur and offer my support to the Black Lives Matter movement. And on that small note, for those of you joining tonight from both the Freeplay zone and YouTube and other ways besides, I simply wish to mention that my Animal Crossing island is actually open for anyone who may care for a gentle space to visit and wander, to gather fossils and fish. The code is just 11T4T. I'm just going to post it very quickly in the Freeplay zone for anyone who may care to wander by. Of course, be kind, but feel free to gather as many flowers and otherwise as you may wish. The zone might have just disconnected me, but aside, the code is 11T4T. And I suppose I simply want to mention that I want this to be a really informal talk, you know, almost conversational in nature. I know it's about 5 p.m., especially for those of you in Australia. So I know many of you are cooking, and I just want you to treat this as you would any other sort of rambling, incoherent 20-minute podcast. I won't be preparing any slides, so it's very audio only. So by all means, please brew yourself a mug of tea or a cup of coffee and snuggle up at your own leisure. I want this to be a digital event that's as gentle as imaginable. I suppose to take you on the journey of these next few minutes and over the course of this talk, I want to begin by breaking down what digital humanities is and how it prescribes to the notion of poetics and sort of the worldness of other spaces, of virtual spaces inside. From there, I sort of want to explore how that relates to social networks and social spaces we're all sort of arcanely familiar with now. And then how I sort of took some of that knowledge or some of those ideas and applied them to the Library of Babel. Let me just quickly log into the zone again. It would be lovely to join you again. So I suppose, oh goodness, one of you is already coming through. Hey, welcome by, Demi from Windfall. That's such a beautiful island name. Sorry, I'll let that sort of go on its own now. I won't get too distracted. I suppose I should merely say that digital humanities and the study of online linguistics primarily caters towards the emergence of new forms of language, and in particular, the notion of poetics, which for those of you who may not be familiar with the term, however academic it might be, is simply the study of literature as literature. It's not a framework of answers, but rather attempts to ask the question of what literature is, and how one might even begin to define it. Poetics asks you as the reader and the observer, what are the forms of literature that you observe? What is the nature of one genre relative to another? And how do they change or intersect or differentiate from one another? What is the intersection point of science fiction to fantasy? Where do they weave together or differentiate? And what actually happens when you take individual words or letters and string them along in a sentence as inspired by the stylistic idiosyncrasies of a particular poet or author or sociological principle or political ideology? What happens? How will this one sentence differ from other sentences? And how do these individual lines on a page grow to become something more than their collective parts? What kind of atmosphere does it imbue, and what is its quality of being? What kind of imagery would this line or this collection of words evoke within the minds of its reader? And traditionally, poetics has primarily related to the field of theatre and literature and poetry. But I hope you can all immediately sort of see how such a framework can be abstracted to access any sort of medium of self-expression, from cinematography to the poetics of music and sound and game design, and in particular, the poetics of virtual worlds and other spaces. In 2003, Elizabeth Karlstrup defined the word worldness, a sort of poetics of virtual worlds. I'll post a link to her sort of 10-page academic article after the talk for those who may wish to care to read it in your own time. Sorry, I'm getting really flustered. I'm not talking online, let alone for such an extended amount of time, is not my natural pursuit. I'm naturally quite introverted. But as a caveat to this article, I suppose I simply wish to say that it was published in 2003, which in the history of game design and the notion of virtual worlds is actually already a really long time ago, right? And she uses EverQuest as a primary example of a virtual world in a space now when we have so many other avenues of self-expression, from Minecraft to Animal Crossing to the Freeplay zone to social networks such as Facebook and Twitter. Worldness is the act of asking how it feels to dwell within a virtual realm, to ask ourselves what creates these experiences and how we impersonally interpret what happens there. You know, worldness is the small and intimate act of asking how an atmosphere may grow from more than its collective parts. And what actually happens when you take textures and music cues and shaders and mechanics and different features and you weave them all together into one cohesive experience? What occurs there? What kind of space grows from that abundant collection of things? What kind of atmosphere is imbued, or what kind of emotion is imparted on them? in place of the player. What do we as players collectively bring to a virtual world, and what does that virtual world impart back on us? And traditionally, this has usually been prescribed purely to the realm of video games and sort of video game virtual worlds. So that of, say, Second Life or World of Warcraft, and then later on to endlessly generated realms of Minecraft and similar. And I'd ask the question of how do the mechanics available to us in a virtual world like that of Minecraft impact our relationship to it? How does crafting influence the way we perceive that world and react to it? But tonight I would like to frame it a little bit different. And I'd like to take the concept of poetics and worldness and apply it to a far broader horizon of software. I want to ask you what the poetics of software is, and how it relates to us now in this time and age. I'm sure I'm not alone. The Freeplay zone is asking me to pick up a lanyard, which I will do in due time. Hold on. I suppose what I want to bring to you tonight is not a series of answers, but rather a series of questions. To ask, what is the poetics of the software we use on a common day basis? What is the poetics of a piece of software such as Photoshop? How does it influence the way we create and design and draw and illustrate? What of the poetics of something like Unity? How does it influence the way we perceive game design or the way we develop games within its ecosystem? And then by extension, perhaps, what is the poetics of a site like Twitter? How does its collection of features and mechanics influence our sense of atmosphere there, our sense of being? How does it enable or push us towards certain behavioral patterns, or how might these be more reflective of a corporate interest or one of capitalism rather than one of innate human interaction? How does Twitter imbue a certain sense of space, and what does that feel like? I know for myself, at least, Twitter often feels like one that is not consenting to my needs or my wishes, but rather it is often staggeringly bleak and cynical. It is neither comforting nor belonging. Rather, it is almost empty of any sense of being. And I think if the free play zone and spaces like Animal Crossing and similar are any indication, it's that our social networks and the way we communicate online, whether through Twitter or Facebook or Slack or Zoom, could be so much more. They could be genuine spaces of atmosphere and kindness and kindred connection and belonging. I wouldn't normally do this, but I'd love to sort of impart a small exercise on you. I want you for a moment just to close your eyes. Maybe take a deep breath. I think it's been a really long year for all of us in one way or another. And I want you just briefly for a moment, imagine or go back to a memory of a space that has brought you great comfort and reassurance. This could be a warmly comforting cafe in the early mornings on a Saturday, to the small bustling sounds of other people drinking their coffee and having anonymous conversations that you are not part of. It could be a library hushed to the monodrone of books and small people recommending each other small reads in between the shelving units. It could be a small house party slowly winding down during the earlier hours of the morning as you appreciate one last cigarette before you head to bed, the rain beating along the window panes. I want you to imagine these spaces and just sort of try to decipher the poetics of that memory or that space. What are its collective parts? How does it imbue a sense of atmosphere? Why does it induce a sense of comfort or communal belonging? And how might we take that and abstract that towards new and exciting systems of social connection? I want you to hold on to that sense of atmosphere and open your eyes now and ask yourself that, Rather than designing social networks for the efficient and functional transversal of communication, it appears my Animal Crossing town just had a communication error. I'm so sorry about that. Let me just check on it. There's not much I can do about that, but thank you so much to all of you who wandered by. I'm glad at least a few of you had a chance to discover it. I suppose, to get back on track, where was I? Rather than designing social networks for the efficient and functional transversal of communication, rather than just treating them as functional software or something that is unbeholden to values or ideological principles, or something that increasingly serves the commercial interests of their respective corporations, how may we design these spaces to be of one of communal belonging? How may we as game designers and creators take our collective understanding of the design of other spaces to create self-contained ecosystems with a clear identity? How would it feel to design a piece of social software designed not only to evoke a functional wish for communication, but also one that imbues a sense of feeling and atmosphere? What would it feel like to take Twitter and to design it around that warmly comforting cafe you just imagined, or that library, or that house party, or the act of snuggling up in bed was a warm and cozy book? What features would you keep? What mechanics would you stir and make and change? What would disappear? Would you keep the like system as a basic framework for acceptability, or would you do away with it entirely? How about the follower counter? What kind of framework does that imply, and what kind of hierarchies does that create within its present setting? Would you keep that or do away with it entirely? I suppose the question I'm trying to frame and the question I'm trying to bring to you is, how can we take the notion of communal belonging and atmospheric design and game design and apply that to the static and often functional social networks we have for ourselves? How can we take games and design new and interesting forms of communication that feel healing to engage with? These were questions I was beginning to ask myself about a year ago when I began designing the Library of Babel. And despite still not having a clear answers, the Library of Babel was primarily designed around the notion of exploring an arcane secondhand bookshop, one filled with any manner of mysterious and unbetold texts. It was the notion that you could pick up any book at any moment to come across any idle thought by another player. Even the spaces between each message, however distant they might be, was consciously designed to evoke a sense of individualism, such that each message felt individual and unique in its presentations and its space in the world. Rather than cluster your viewport with 5 or 6 messages like that on Facebook or Twitter on Slack, I wanted each message to feel individual and have its own presence, to feel special and unique, and away from the ability for anyone to indicate their judgment, to feel safe and intimate in its presentation. We're nearing about the 20-minute mark here. And though I'm not really sure how to finish this talk, I simply ask that the next time you drift onto Twitter or Slack or Facebook, ask yourself about the poetics and the worldness of the space you're about to enter. What are its boundaries? What atmosphere or values does it intrinsically imbue? Whose interests does it really serve? And how does it inform the way you communicate and relate to others? Does it evoke a sense of communal belonging or comfort or coziness? Or is the feeling that it leaves you with something else entirely? And by extension of that, what may Twitter learn from the social atmosphere of something like Animal Crossing? What may YouTube learn from the heartwarming space that is the Freeplay zone? I want to leave you with the thought that software and games are in many ways one and the same. Despite software often being very functionally limited in how we frame it, they could be intrinsically so much more than that. So what may we as game designers be able to bring to the poetics of other software spaces? Whether that's our social networks such as Twitter and Facebook or otherwise, or even smaller spaces of creativity such as Unity and Unreal, both social and beyond. I realize not many of us perhaps have much influence over the design and future of these sort of larger conglomerate social networks, but I would still love for us to be a part of the conversation and to allow our voices to be heard. That even if it may not be possible for us to envision new and hopeful spaces of communal belonging and social connection, to create spaces both small and intimate and larger than we've ever conceived. Thank you so much for tuning into my talk. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask them. And thank you so much again for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm going to try access the Freeplay zone again, if I can. Oh. Okay, I'm just trying to get in now. What should my avatar look like? Huh? Oh, thank you so much, Yul. Honestly, I was so nervous and flustered about this. I think the longest talk I ever gave was last year at Freeplay Parallels, which was about 8 minutes in length. So you can imagine 20 to 30 minutes is so much more intimidating. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask it. Oh, I've got one coming in now, sorry. So one of the questions is thoughts on what makes a space feel cozy? How much does it have to do with the software code? And how much was those who occupy it? You know, I wish I had time to give a coherent answer, but what I can do is recommend the talk by Joseph White on Pico 8 and the search for cozy design spaces, which he talks about the notion of a self-contained ecosystem. For those not familiar, Pico 8 is a sort of impressionistic sort of fantasy console, as they describe it. And it's about an hour of length. He published it in 2018 at the New York University Game Center. And I absolutely recommend it as a piece of cozy writing and the notion of creating software that imbues something more than just pure function, but also that of coziness and the notion of a collective community. Sadly, the sort of wider conversation on game poetics is still really limited, but also I would look at the writings and workings of Natalie Lawhead, who goes by @AlienMelon on Twitter, which I'll just sort of link at the free play zone now. They've created a whole plethora of interesting software and technology and hardware. For example, the Zine Maker, which is at once both functional and playful, and though not intrinsically cozy in its atmosphere, imbues you to play with it in a way that is really, really beautiful. I can absolutely recommend all their work, both their sort of desktop companions and otherwise. I think in general, software has often been seen as this space outside any sort of intrinsic value systems or political ideology. Despite what we as game designers often, and especially, I hope I'm speaking to the right audience here as Freeplay members, we're intrinsically aware that games are inherently art, they're inherently political in their manifestation, and they possess both intrinsic meanings and values. And we don't often associate that with software or hardware or otherwise. And I suppose what I'd like to do is ask you to consider what the values of our software is. What politics does it impart? What is the poetics of those spaces? I'm just getting a question in now. Is digital music a space created by software? And you know, I don't really know how to answer that. Music is one of the few avenues of self-expression that I've never really dabbled in that much. I would say, yeah, I'm going to leave that question unanswered, however good it is. I don't think that's for me to say. I think to go back to the earlier question on how to make a space feel cozy, I think smallness is a fundamental part of it. Coziness, actually, there's a beautiful article that I talked about in Freeplay Parallels last year, sort of a manifesto for coziness created by members of the Kit Fox team and similar. Do I think liminal or non-spaces can be made cozy? I absolutely believe they can. Yeah, I think coziness is not a sense of space or otherwise. Oh, like cozy airports. Yes, I hope so. Or cozy, I think so. I think it's intrinsically about imbuing a sense of comfort and safety, whether in the form of a loading screen or an airport or mall or otherwise. Right, look at the intrinsic architecture of an airport. What values, what sense of space or architectural poetics does it currently imbue? And then ask yourself what would have to change to make an airport cozy. Right, Vancouver's airport, for example, has birds on and stuff. It intrinsically attempts to create a space that we feel safe in, regardless of the reality of the fact. I do wish, both in games and software, and you're right, in sort of actual physical parts of architecture, I wish we could see and sort of analyze just how hostile they are to us, and try to design alternative systems of kindred connection. Oh. Okay, I'm getting the 1 minute warning that it's about time to wrap up. But thank you so much to those of you who sort of snuggled up and listened in. And again, feel free to throw me any questions unanswered or otherwise at Twitter at Idle Murmurs. And here's simply wishing you all a lovely evening going forwards. Thank you so much for tuning in.